welcome to this presentation, Massive Changes at PMI, the PMBok Guide 7, PMP Exam Changes, and more. So during the next 45 minutes or less, I will be chatting about some of the updates that are going on at PMI and some of the very dramatic updates going on. So my name is Peter Monkhouse. I am a volunteer with PMI. I'm on the PMI Educational Foundation Board of Directors right now. Previously served a number of other volunteer roles at PMI. I also teach at University of Toronto and University of Calgary and Ryerson. And I'm an author of book Gen P, New Generation of Product Owners. My co-author, Joanna Tivik, is here as well with me. So lots of things going on, but before I go any further, I am speaking on behalf of just Peter. I'm not representing PMI in any way, shape, or form in this presentation. Any opinions shared here are mine. The information I'm presenting here is generally available all publicly, maybe not easily found, but I'm not going to be having any secrets here that are inside information for you, but hopefully I'll put it together in a nice coordinated way. Okay, with that said, let's go on and just say we're in a world of a perfect storm right now. So if you remember the movie from, I'm surprised, it seemed like it was just yesterday where this movie and the storm happened, but it was way back over 20 years ago where we had a fishing voyage that got caught up in a low pressure system that was forced south, actually very unusual, was forced south by some Arctic air right around this time of year in early November, and created these huge waves and quite a dramatic scene. So something similar has happened here at PMI that's got a number of changes all culminating at the same time. So there are a number of changes that are happening at PMI. I am just going to focus on 5 around affecting the certification. So we'll talk about the PMI application form very briefly. It's already changed back in June. We'll talk about online proctored exams, another form of writing the PMP exam and CAPM exam, which was introduced I guess back in June as well. We'll talk about changes to the registered education program. We'll talk about the changes coming to the PMP exam on January 2nd, 2021. And then at the end, we'll talk about the updates happening to the PMBok guide, which will be available sometime in the first quarter, not announced a date yet. As I mentioned before I officially got started, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. I am going to go through each of these because I am a little concerned about time, and then I'll pick up the questions at the end. Okay, before I go into these changes, let's just spend a few minutes talking about why this is happening. Well, part of it is the process. So PMI, as an ISO certified body for their certification exam, as well as a PMBok guide being an ANSI certified standard, has to go through a 4-year cycle for updating. So the PMBok guide was last published back in 2017. So 2021 is the scheduled update. So every 4 years, PMI will go through and review and update the PMBok guide. So they've been doing that since 1996, when the first edition of the PMBok guide was published. So this is just part of the process, albeit this change is a little bit more radical than many. Also, roughly every 4 years, PMI will review the exam content outline, the ECO, for the PMP exam. That was actually reviewed back in 2019, early 2019 was when they did it. They originally had planned to update the PMP exam in June of this year, but because of COVID, it got pushed off to January 2nd. But again, it's part of a cycle to update this roughly every 4 years. So it just happens that because of COVID and the timing, things have both come, these two updates have become part at the same time. Now, I mentioned the REP program is being retired, and in large part, one of the reasons for doing this was based on feedback of you, the practitioners who have been taking the PMP exam and PMP prep courses. PMI has been receiving a lot of feedback They refuse to say how much, but a lot of feedback from people taking the PMP prep courses about courses being canceled, about poor quality of instructors, about poor quality of content. And yet these were all registered education providers. So they're they're retiring the REP program and creating an ATP instead to replace it to try to address these quality issues. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. The third reason why we're having these changes is the world is changing. As most of you know, that as we lead projects in our organizations, we are no longer solely using waterfall. We're using different approaches, in particular agile, but we're also using iterative, incremental, hybrid approaches. And the PMBok guide and the PMP exam both really didn't reflect the amount of knowledge a project manager should have in other methodologies for doing projects. And this has been what I would think is partly a major driver for the more significant changes that's been done. And the last change that the last reason that occasionally gets mentioned is that PMI has been saying for many, many years that the PMP exam is not a test on the PMBok guide. It is a test on the knowledge, skills, and competencies that project managers should have to be good project managers. And but even so, people still think all I have to do is study the PMBok guide and pass the PMP exam. So they're trying to move and make it very clear this is a difference. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on as well. So that is why we have that's why PMI is making these changes. So let's go through them, each one of the 5 that I'll talk about today. So the first is the application form. Long overdue, I would say. It's been greatly simplified. PMI has really looked at some of the information they've been collecting and if they ever used it. So we had to input the percentage we would spend in each of the process groups. PMI never used it, so they got rid of it. We had to input based on hours, but we never, why? That's so difficult. So they've changed it to months. So they're trying to make it a lot simpler. They used to ask for us to put in references for each one. Now it's only when you're audited do you have to provide it. Used to be able to have limited to 500 characters to submit the application. You're now up to 500 words, a lot more easier to describe some of the things that you do. So the application form, a lot simpler online, 4 screens to go through, should be a lot easier to do, but the rules in a sense still stays the same, right? You need 36 hours instead of 36 months instead of 4,500 hours of work experience with a university degree, or you need 60 months or instead of the, whatever it was, 6,000 hours, 7,500 hours if you didn't have one. So the criteria still stay the same, it's just they've made the application form a little bit easier. That's been in place since June. I'm getting reasonably good feedback from my students on the change. Next is around exam logistics. So probably accelerated because of COVID and the Pearson VUE exams centers being closed in March. PMI has taken on the online proctoring of the PMP exam. So when you go to write your PMP exam, you now have 2 choices. You can write at a Pearson VUE center and you can do it online proctored. So the Pearson VUE centers are open in most cases. Of course, they're subject to local COVID-19 rules. I know here in Toronto, where I am, this means you have to wear a mask. It means the centers can't have as many people in them to make sure there's appropriate physical distancing that goes on. So if you're going to write in person, you need to make sure that you understand what the rules are. They've also introduced the online proctored exam version. This means you can write in the comfort of your own home to write the exam. However, be aware that the online proctored exam means that someone's going to be watching you on your camera all the time. You have to have your camera on all the time. You cannot move out of camera view. If you do, you're disqualified. So to deal with physical problems that one would have with sitting still for 4 hours, they've split the exam into roughly 2 2-hour periods. So you go for about 2 hours, you get a 10-minute break, and then you finish off with 2 hours. Of course, in between, the second half, you can't go back to the first half questions. So it really looks like two 2-hour exams. And when you write the exam, you can have nothing around you. So you have to have clear desktops, and they'll take the camera and get you show around the room where you are, so they can see and may ask you to move some things around just so that you have nothing within reach. Now, in general, this seems to work well. There are some cases where there are technical glitches, of course, because you're relying on your internet provider to get access. And I suspect Pearson VUE may be having some other issues as well. My experience has been that Pearson VUE is very helpful in making sure they resolve these very quickly, but you have to be prepared for this challenge of having some technical issues. However, the advantage is you don't have to go anywhere. So there's pros and cons to both. At least you have a choice, and certainly now, as we're getting to the exam changing, it gives a lot more scalability for more people to write the exam. Okay, next one, the ATP program. So this is the Associate Training Partner, Affiliate Training Partner. I can't remember what the A stands for. It's either Associate or Affiliate Training Partner. So as I mentioned, the REP program is being retired, and organizations can join an ATP program. So as an ATP provider, you will be delivering a PMP prep course that PMI has prepared. So all ATPs will deliver the same material. This is an attempt to improve the quality of the material that's being provided. In addition, all instructors that delivers a PMP prep course have to be certified by PMI. So PMI goes through a certification process where they want you to attend some training course and show you have some experience in teaching and in different methodologies for project management in order to become certified. And to not only delivering the material, you're having one of these certified instructors also deliver the material. You will be asked to give feedback at the end, so you'll be able to have a chance to rate the instructors, and certainly PMI has given every indication that they'll take that feedback seriously, and instructors who don't do well will no longer be eligible to teach the courses. And we've also, PMI has also removed the differentiation for chapters that if a chapter wants to continue delivering PMP prep courses, they have to become an ATP. And the cost for an ATP is much higher than it was for the REP. So you'll see this happening in January, where you'll start seeing the REP program being retired, and PMP prep organizations offering PMP prep courses will start promoting the fact they're an ATP. Now, organizations do not have to become an ATP. They can still offer PMP prep courses. So you're not forced to take your 35 hours from an ATP. You can take it from anyone that you want. However, if they're not an ATP, they won't have access to PMI graphics unless they pay for them separately through a license agreement. They're not going to be having access to the material, and they're not going to have their instructors certified. So you may still have some quality issues. Thank you, Sylvie, for authorized training partner. Okay, so that's the ATP program. So that's a change that you'll see effective January. Okay, so now let's get on to the last two, the biggest two that we have to worry about. So the PMP exam changes. So I always hated this when REPs would say, the sky is falling when the PMP exam gets updated, take it now. But I do believe this is the largest change probably since the early 2000s when they went to the current format of the exam. So there are three changes that are happening with the new exam. The first is that the questions are going to be distributed based on 3 domains. So right now, the questions are distributed based on the 5 process groups: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. Gone, 3 domains: people, process, and business environment. okay? So you see there on the slide that within that, there'll be 42% of the questions based on people, 50% based on process, and 8% based on the business environment. In the exam content outline, they outline tasks that are in each one of these domains. So people, they'll talk about 14 tasks that need to be done. Things like building a team, negotiations, motivating, that sort of thing. In process, there's 17 tasks: create a schedule, estimating, risks. And then business environment, there are 4 tasks. And within each one of these tasks, they have what's called enablers, which are tools or techniques, processes that you need to know. And that's what the questions are going to be based on. Okay. So that's the first major change that we have. Now, right now the existing exam is, as I said, based on the process groups. So I'm not sure how much this will really change the distribution, except it's a different way of looking at things. Second change that they're going to have is that they're going to introduce new question types. So right now you have 200 multiple choice questions. Each question has 4 answers. They're going to be introducing 2 different types of questions. The first is an animation question. So you can picture a little video with stick figures talking. Let's say a team's having a conflict. So you'll see 2 members in conflict, and then there'll be a multiple choice question asked for you in this scenario. What is the best approach to resolve the conflict? So instead of reading a script, you'll be able to listen to the characters having that conversation, as an example. They'll also have a script available for people who have accessibility issues. So that's one thing that you'll have. The second one is they're going to use drag and drop type questions or instead of multiple choice questions. So you need to be prepared for these types of questions. I've been told initially these are going to be a relatively low percentage, probably 5% or less of the exam, but depending how it goes, they may increase. So if you're writing the new exams in the earlier part of the year, you may only see a few of these. If you're writing it later, you may see more. Okay, so that's the second thing that you're going to see. And then the third part, and pardon all the text on the slide, but rather than I'll just take it verbatim here. So largely the existing PMP exam, I would argue, is based on predictive or waterfall approach. So what this note is saying is that going forward, 50% of the exam will be based on this predictive or waterfall approach. The other 50% will be based on other approaches. In particular, they're saying 23% is agile, 27% is hybrid. And they're also saying in this long note that it will cross all 3 of the domains. So you're going to get questions in business environment, people, as well as process from the different approaches. So it's going to be hard to know what that means. I certainly know, looking at some of the new course material, I'm a certified ATP trainer now, so I got access to material, is that, for example, on the people side, they're going to talk a lot about servant leadership as a way of nodding to agile. I think you should use servant leadership in most cases, but that's my opinion. So the questions will go through all areas. The questions will be based on these approaches. So this means that whatever area you're coming from with your project experience, you're going to have some understanding of all of them in order to pass the PMP exam. Okay, so those are the 3 major changes that are happening on January 2nd. PMI has discussed that as they target, how am I going to say this? So as an ISO standard, they have to have a certain pass rate that they want to target for the exam, which means they adjust the pass mark, that they're going to be looking, and they have already looked at how to adjust this based on on how people write the exam. So there'll be some shakeout that will go on in January. I will mention that they did run a pilot with over 1,000 people in March and April of this year. So they have an idea of where things should fit. from that point of view. Okay, so that's the exam changes. Everything I've heard and seen, if this will be effective January 2nd. There's nothing that's going to change it. As I said, they were on track to make it available July 1st, but it was delayed because of COVID. So it's going January 2nd. If you haven't already booked your PMP exam, it's probably too late now to do so. Slots are booked up and the timing's going to make it hard. You're going to be faced with this exam with the distribution of questions and the more agile questions and the different exam question types. Okay. The other thing that PMI has done for this, after much complaining, although I'm sure Keith will remember the days when we wrote the PMP exam, we got the box of books. They've reintroduced and published the reference books that are used for the PMP exam. So there are 10 books that they're using to base the questions on, including the PMBok Guide 6th edition and the Agile Practice Guide. I will be talking about the changes to the PMBok Guide next, but I know that going into the 2021, the PMP exam will be based on the 6th edition and probably will be for the rest of the year in 2021. So, if you're concerned about the PMBok Guide changing the PMP exam, it won't happen. The PMP exam is going to be based on the knowledge, the text, the lexicon, I should say, in the 6th edition. Well, as I mentioned, what's not changing, the exam is still going to be 200 questions. It's still going to be 4 hours. Okay, there was some talk that the time may change, but I think they're still sitting at the 4 hours, so that part's not changing. Okay, so on to talk about the PMBok Guide. So the PMBok Guide 7th edition is going to be a major shift in their approach to the PMBok Guide. So we can say goodbye to 5 process groups, 10 knowledge areas, 49 processes. These are all going to PMI Standards Plus, which is PMI's online platform to talk about methodologies and tools and techniques. We're also going to say goodbye to this massive document of over 1,000 pages that I have to go and visit a chiropractor every time I pick it up. Instead, we're going to be replaced with 12 principles, 8 domains. We're going to be focused on value delivery. And I've been told there's going to be less pages. I was hoping it would be much less, but I think they're saying it's going to be a little under 700. Now, as I go in the PMBok Guide, I will say that PMI has been running a series of webinars on projectmanagement.com around the 7th edition. This is where I'm pulling a lot of my information from. And every one of these, they caution saying the guide is still being finalized, so it is subject to change. So what I'm going to share with you now is the latest that I know and I've heard. It may change when it actually get published next year. So this is a nice graphic that PMI started publishing about 6 months ago, trying to show how the 6th edition is going to map to the 7th edition of the PMBok Guide. So you may or may not realize the 6th edition really is 3 parts. The first part, or part 1, is the guide, where we have our 10 knowledge areas. The first 3 chapters, and we're divided up in our 10 knowledge areas as we get very familiar with scope, schedule, time, cost, quality, blah, blah, blah. Then the second part is the actual standard, the ANSI standard. So a higher level view of the 49 processes, dropping the tools and techniques. And then we have what affectionately called the back matter, the appendices, glossaries, and indices. So in the new 7th edition, the standard is kept, okay? But as I mentioned, it's going to be focused, there'll be a discussion on the value delivery system, and then there'll be a discussion on the 12 principles, which will form the standard. So this part goes up here. The guide will be focusing on 8 performance domains. Okay. So the reason for the shift, of course, is to allow for the inclusion and fitting within the PMBok Guide different methodologies. They have a section on tailoring, And then they have a section on models, methods, and artifacts. So this is where the tools and techniques are all going to be gathered together and stuck in here. Okay? And they're going to include the ones that many of the ones we're familiar with in the 6th edition, and they're going to be adding more to take into account iterative and agile adaptive approaches. And then, of course, there's the back matter appendix, glossaries, and indices. Okay? The idea is that if you want more information about tools and techniques or how to use them, if you think there are other tools and techniques to use, they're going to be on PMI's Standard Plus digital platform. This is available now to PMI members. So if you are a PMI member, start poking around and having a look at it. They're still populating it and filling it. It's not complete, but their environment would think they'll grow so that they can have an environment to support us as practitioners without having to wait for the PMBok guide to be issued every time. Okay. So here are the 12 principles. So these have been out for a while. PMI published an exposure draft of the standard back in January, which highlighted these 12 principles. So they'll talk about stewardship of the company assets, building the team, accountability and respect, talk about engaging stakeholders, focus on delivering value, having a holistic thinking approach. So this is a systems thinking, which is always embedded in the PMBok guide, although sometimes it wasn't very clear. Talk about leadership skills you need to have, tailoring or selecting the right approach. Again, we saw more of that in the 6th edition, so calling that out. Talk about building in quality, how to deal with complexity, opportunities and threats, dealing with risks and the uncertainties that we have in projects, being adaptive and resilient, being able to adapt to ever-changing environment, and of course, dealing with change management, both the change within a project, but the change in the environment as well. So those are the 12 principles. The PMBok guide under the standard will explain these more, but you can see that just about any methodology that you use for a project will fit under and address these 12 principles. Within the guide itself, they're going to change over to 8 domains, performance domains. So here are the 8. I think it's the 4th webinar they did, or 3rd one, they did a very nice mapping between the performance domains and the what's in the existing 6th edition of the PMBok guide. So you can see some of these will work through very nicely. So they'll talk about stakeholders, how to gauge stakeholders, work with stakeholders, identify stakeholders, so manage and monitor them. Talk about teams, so how do you build a team, motivate a team, manage a team, right? So see that. Development approach and life cycle. So this is where you talk about how you go about building a schedule, how you make a schedule for your project. Planning becomes a catch-all of many things, including things such as estimating, but also planning, building a schedule, and so on. So it's quite large. Project work largely maps to the execution, what we know is the execution phase, getting the work done. So whether you're going to be using an iterative or agile approach with using sprints or using a waterfall approach, just getting it done. Delivery is completing the deliverables in the project. So you're going to deal with things such as quality, transition, completing the project. Measurement largely will focus under controlling. So how do you know how well you're doing? And then last is navigating uncertainty and ambiguity. So risk, how to deal with the uncertainty around the projects. So you can see that many of the processes that we have, that we've been known to love in the existing PMBok guide, or that you've been used to seeing within an agile approach within Scrum, can be ended up fitting into these domains, which is what the idea is to allow for this truly reflect the PMBok guide as a framework for doing projects. Okay, and my last slide, and I have managed to get through this in time to answer your questions, is just some where you get more information. So certainly on the PMI website, you can look for the PMP exam updates. That is where you're going to find a list of the 10 books, as well as anything else that's going to happen with the exam. They're working very hard to make that a source of a lot of information for you. As you can also look at the PMI.org for more about the Authorized Training Partner Program. I knew I put it down somewhere. As I mentioned, PMI's done a series of webinars around the PMBok Guide 7th edition. They're called Getting Under the Hood of the PMBok Guide 7th edition. They've had 6 of them. The 7th one's going on at the end of this month. So feel free to go to, if you're a PMI member, projectmanagement.com is free, and you can search on Getting Under the Hood of the PMBok Guide 7th edition. You can find these and you can listen to more. The actual webinars tends to be relatively short. The questions tend to be very long. And then I've got the standardsplus.pmi.org, which I mentioned for the Standards Plus. Okay, so Sylvie is asking if there's any change to the 175 test questions and 25 pre-test questions. I have not heard of any change in that format, Sylvie. That should be continuing. Okay. Sylvie's asking, when the development approach lifecycle will be choosing the method and methodology for delivery? Yeah, so I'm going from memory. So so what's the divide between the in the domains between the approach and the planning? It's in the webinars. I can't remember off the top of my head what the split is, but they have got it documented. So I'll have to go back and check the webinar that they did to show that, to answer that question. Okay, other questions that people have around the changes? Okay, so PMI has not committed. So Joanna's asking, when's the 7th edition of the PMBok Guide coming out? PMI is not committed. They're saying the first quarter. So they have not said whether that's January or March. Keep hoping that they'll give us an official date for that, but that's what they're thinking. I'm smiling because Sylvie's saying probably March 31st or maybe March 32nd. I would tend to, I think it will, the large depends on the acceptance. I mean, they've done quite a good job of communicating this. So the structure has been in place for over a year now. They were running sessions back last October around finalizing the principles and the domains. So I would think they're in probably good shape for the first quarter, but don't know when it is. Thank you, Keith. I believe the 6th edition was actually done on schedule. I think they did a reasonably good job with that one, because they published an exposure draft early to the REPs and the training providers to update their material before they released it. So I was talking to Keith yesterday around this, and around the change to a huge change to the exam. As I said, PMI is trying to be a lot more transparent without jeopardizing the quality and the security of the exam questions. They went through for about a period of 6 months this year publishing a retired question from their exam bank that was supposed to be typical of the new questions on the new exam for about 6 months this year. And I went through and I did them, and there weren't a lot of, what I would call truly agile questions. And yet, when you think about this, PMI has their Agile Project Management certification. There's Scrum Master certifications and so on out there. So for the PMP, they're not looking at you becoming a solely an Agile Project Manager or a Scrum Master. Those are other roles. So they tend to be much more of a bit of a higher level. So I'm not sure if, you certainly have to know more about adaptive than we do now for the current exam. And you have to know more about iterative and hybrid, but I'm not sure you're going to be as much as as much as you think or on these questions. Of course, we'll have to see. Yes, it is a lot of changes. As I said, these are 5 major things that are all happening in a period of about, well, less than 12 months from the exam, the application form change through to the PMBok guide. It is a perfect storm. So Sylvie's saying you understand the concept's true, but it is what project managers are expected to do. So if you think about you're leading an agile project, you're going to have a Scrum Master who's going to work through the various details of how the sprints are going to be organized and how the work's going to be done. So you have to understand the concept. Yet, on the other hand, as I was looking at the training material it provided, they still were asking us to teach you how to do a critical path method. So, it's going to be in some ways similar than what we had currently. Other questions people may have?
I have a question, Peter. This is Sammy from Edmonton.
Go ahead,
Peter,
Sammy.
the material that PMI will be providing for the trainers will include what is in the PMBok plus the 10 books, or is it reflecting what will the exam will cover?
Yeah.
No?
So the material that's being provided as part of the ATP program is PMP prep material. It is not a PMBok guide training course. It's reflecting the skills and competencies that are required by project managers. They've organized the material against the exam content overview or outline, I should say. So it doesn't even follow the order of the PMBok guide. It will go through people, processes, and business environment.
Excellent. So just a clarification, like the exam will cover 10 books plus the PMBok. So that
no, it's 10 books, including the PMBok guide and the Agile practice guide.
Okay, fine. So 10 books. So the teaching material that will be provided to the instructors will reflect those total of 10 books. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So basically it's giving us an indication of what will be in the exam.
Yes. So it's going through the exam content outline and giving more meat to it.
Excellent.
Right? So they'll talk about, build a schedule. So they'll talk about ways to build a schedule. Okay.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Okay, so Joanna asked about products. So actually, I was very pleased to see in the PMBok guide, they talk about the value streams, delivering value, which is done through products. So it's certainly a lot clearer being mentioned in the business environment, this idea that in a project, you're producing a product, service, or result, and you have to know what that is. I did talk to one of the fellows who was on the team who promised me there's a whole appendix around products in the new version of the PMBok guide. Yet to see what the appendices are, but it looks like because of this linking to the business environment, they're going to recognize that this idea you're going to have more of our products, as I like to say, and with Joanna, we've done some presentations on projectmanagement.com talking about projects deliver products, products deliver strategy, and the importance of us as project managers to know that we are delivering product, and that product is what's going to help deliver value to the customer and benefits to the organization. So Sylvie is asking this question about sample questions. So at this point in time, PMI is providing the sample questions that students can do as part of their purchasing of content with the course. I just saw it. I don't think I've gone through. I think it's 200 questions that they're providing, but that's it, but not multiple questions. And of course, we say to anyone when they're preparing for the PMP exam, you got to do like 1,000 questions. So I think they're really leaving this up to the ATPs or others who are providing material to develop their own question banks. Okay, so the pricing for the PMP exam, is that what you're referring to, Sylvie, when you say? Or someone asked a question? Oh, sorry, yes, another question saying, I've heard no word about pricing. That's an independent discussion about how the items are being priced. So what PMI is saying in terms of the courses, they're going to let the market determine the pricing of the courses. So each ATP can price their course how they wish. So some may go up because they're having to pay for some costs to get you access to the material. Some may go down because they don't have to maintain it. Don't happen. In terms of the PMP exam, PMI makes those decisions all the time about changing the pricing. Not sure what they're going to do for that. I've not heard anything that they are or not going to change it. So the questions that are, as I understand it, Kevin, those questions that are available on the student side of the portal. So it doesn't matter whether you're basic or premier ATP. I believe if you're a student, if you get access to the student material, the sample questions are there. But don't hold me to it. And don't hold me to the fact there's 200. I just saw a tag that there are sample questions. I didn't go into it. Other questions? Did I miss any questions? Okay, well, not hearing any questions, so hopefully you found this helpful. Thank you very much for attending. Good luck on your PMP exam journey, from whichever perspective you take it on. And as I said, please keep an eye on the PMI website for the latest updates as things are evolving in PMI communications. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me as well. So thank you.